अस्सलाम वालेकुम। खैरियत से हैं आप लोग? Today we'll be discussing about the hormones in the endocrine system. It's the introduction of endocrine system basically. So let's discuss the introduction of how the hormones work and what is the endocrine system. So basically it's the body's long distance regulators. Hormones are chemical signals that are secreted in circulatory systems and communicate regulatory message within the body. Hormones reach all parts of the body, but only target cells have receptors for that hormones. It means that hormones are the chemical substances which are produced, and they might work to inside the cell or the adjacent cells, or it can pour its secretion into the blood and can go to the distance areas or the target cells where it can work differently. So we have receptors for these hormones at different places, at different cells of the body. Two system coordinates communication throughout the body: the endocrine system and the nervous system. Endocrine basically system secretes hormones which are slower, long acting. It basically responses includes reproduction, development, energy, metabolism, growth and behavior. The nervous system conveys high speed electrical signals along specialized cells called neurons. These signals regulate the other cells. So basically the neuroendo systems are connected as such that we have hypothalamus. Hypothalamus basically regulates different areas or different which basically regulates pituitary gland, and pituitary gland basically secretes different hormones which regulates the different areas or the glands inside the body. Endocrine signal is just one of the several ways that information is transmitted between the cells. Then first of all we have intracellular communication, that is communication between the cells. The way that signals are transmitted between cells are classified in two criteria: the types of the secreting cell and the route taken by the signals in reaching its target cells. Means which type of cell is secreting at this secretion and where it is going and how. First of all, we look out to endocrine signals. Hormones secreted into extracellular fluid by endocrine cells reach their target via bloodstream. It means the glands pour their secretions into the blood. First of all, the cells secrete them into the intracellular fluid or the extracellular fluid. Then it is taken up by the blood. And the blood is basically the shuttle or the medium which takes it to the different cells of the body. Endocrine signals maintains homeostasis, mediate responses to stimuli. It regulates growth and development. Basically, these are the areas where the endocrine hormones or the endocrine glands comes in. Endocrine glands basically secrete their secretions into the blood. Blood take them to different areas, to the target cells where there are receptors for these endocrine hormones, and then after accepting these hormones they basically play a role in the maintaining body homeostasis, different types of stimuli, growth and development. This is a picture showing endocrine signaling, that the glands are secreting their secretions in the blood. These are the glands which are secreting secretion in the blood. Picture A showing the gland is secreting its secretion into the blood. Blood vessels taking to the different target tissues where they have receptors, and these red ones basically are working on them or attaching to the receptors and causing the response. These are endocrine signals. Then we have paracrine glands. Paracrine glands are those glands which basically secrete their secretions to the adjacent cells. Means they don't have to be carried out by any fluid or any blood or any shuttle system. They secrete their secretions directly and into the space, intracellular space, and that is taken up by the receptors and they cause the response to the cells. Third, we have autocrine. Autocrine means basically the secretions is secreted and acted upon on the same cell. The response is basically the secretions is secreted by the cells and the receptors are on the same cell. So it's autocrine glands. In secretions are is basically secreted by the same cell and is basically acted upon on the same cells. That is autocrine. Then we have neurons. As you all know that neurons basically secrete their secretion in the synapses, presynaptic knob and postsynaptic knob, and their secretions are basically the known as neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters makes basically synapses on the postsynaptic knob where there are receptors and causes response. And likewise, neuroendocrine secretions secretes their secretions into the blood vessels, and blood vessels take them to the target tissues, and they basically attach to the receptors and causes the responses. So these are some types of glands, basically the endocrine glands, the paracrine glands, the autocrine, then we have neurons, synaptic signals in neurons, and then we have neuroendocrine signals. So paracrine and autocrine are local regulators, molecules that act over short distances, reaching target cells solely by diffusion. In paracrine signaling, the target cells lie near the secreting cells. In autocrine is the same cell. This picture is again showing the endocrine signaling, paracrine signaling, and the autocrine signaling. In synapses, we have neurotransmitters like acetylcholine, dopamine, etc., etc. And then we have neurohormones. Basically, they are secreted by hypothalamus, act on pituitary gland, anterior and pituitary gland, secretes their secretions from the pituitary gland, and that they basically reach to the targets. So basically, the connection between hypothalamus and pituitary, the hypothalamus pituitary systems is basically the neurohormones. This basically picture is showing the synaptic signaling and the neuroendocrine signaling. Synaptic basically signaling is between the neurons, neuro junction or neuromuscular junction. Neurosecretory is basically the neurons which secretes their secretions, like hypothalamus secretes its secretion into blood. Then it reaches the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland in response secretes different types of endocrine secretions. Then we have pheromones, chemicals that are introduced to environment. Pheromones basically have their function including marking the trails of food, defining territories, warning of predators, and attracting potential mates. These basically are more active in animals as compared to humans. Basically, the animals mark their territory by secreting their pheromones, like dogs and cats and lions, etc. And basically warns the predators that this area is basically is the area of that animal, and that basically prevents the other animals to enter their areas. So they are more active in animals as compared to humans. In some tissues, endocrine cells are grouped together in a ductless organ glands known as the endocrine glands. So the definition of endocrine gland is as a ductless gland. It doesn't have ducts. It secretes a secretion poured into the blood directly. Basically, it secretes a secretion into intercellular fluid, and then it is taken up by the blood. So endocrine secretions जो है, that is basically they don't have ducts. In contrast to that, the exocrine glands have ducts, like the pancreas. The pancreas have pancreatic duct which pours secretion, mostly the exocrine part of secretions, the enzymes, the bicarbonate into the second part of duodenum through pancreatic duct, which combines with bile duct to form common bile duct, which opens into the second part of duodenum. The endocrine part of the pancreas secretes insulin, glucagon, and somatostatin, which is again is an endocrine part, so it pours the secretion directly into the blood. It doesn't have a duct. So that duct, which is pancreatic duct, takes its secretions from the exocrine part that contains the enzymes and bicarbonate, etc. So these are the basically main endocrine glands in the body. Hypothalamus, then we have pineal gland, we have pituitary glands, anterior and posterior part, then we have thyroid gland in the neck, and we have 4 button shaped parathyroid gland behind the thyroid gland. Then we have adrenal glands, and also known as suprarenal glands, which are basically a triangular shaped glands on both upper side of the both kidneys. Then we have pancreas, which has exocrine and endocrine part both. Then we have ovaries in females and testes in males. Then again we have thymus, which also secretes secretions, heart, which also secretes some hormones, liver, stomach, kidneys, and small intestines. These basically these organs contains endocrine cells. They are not endocrine glands, but they have endocrine secretions, endocrine cells which secrete the endocrine secretions. On the other hand, these are the basically main endocrine glands which produce the endocrine secretions or hormones known as hormones. Three types of hormones are there in vertebrates, in humans and animals. First of all, we have polypeptides made up of proteins and peptides, amines which are derived from amino acids, and steroid hormones which are basically made from cholesterol. Polypeptides, amines, and steroid hormone. Three types of hormones. The steroid hormones are lipid soluble, pass easily through cell membrane, while water soluble hormones like polypeptides, amines do not. The solubility of a hormone correlates with the location of the receptor inside or on the surface of the target cells. It depends. It's either the receptor is on the surface of the cells or inside the cells. Steroid hormones have their receptors mostly inside the cell because they are lipid soluble and can cross the lipid cell membrane. And the peptide and amine hormones basically have the receptor on the cell surface. These are the structures. Like insulin is a polypeptide, cortisol is a steroid, and in amines we have epinephrine, norepinephrine, thyroxine, the thyroid hormone. These are the examples of some of the examples of the polypeptide, amines, and steroid hormones. In polypeptides we have insulin, in amines we have epinephrine and thyroxine, in lipid soluble hydrophobic which can cross the cell membrane easily, steroid hormones we have, example is cortisol. Water and lipid soluble hormones differ in their pathway through the body. Water soluble hormones are secreted by the exocytosis, travel freely in the bloodstream, bind to cell surface receptor. Lipid soluble hormones on the other hand diffuse across the cell membrane because they can cross the cell membrane easily, travel in the bloodstream, bound to transport proteins, and diffuse through the membranes of the target cells. So they cannot travel in the blood easily, so they have to be bound with the transport proteins to the target tissues. And when they reach the target tissues, they can cross the cell membrane and have their receptor connect to the receptor which is basically present inside the cell, but they have to be bounded to the protein so that they can travel in the blood. On the other hand, water soluble hormones can travel freely in the bloodstream and can bind on the cell surface receptors. They have the receptors on the cell surface rather than in the cell as the lipid soluble hormones have. These are the water soluble. They are excreted by exocytosis. They enter into the bloodstream and travel through the blood to the signal receptors and attach it to the receptors and causes the response. On the other hand, lipid soluble hormones are secreted into the blood, attached to the transport protein, carried to the cell. It basically passes to the cell membrane and attaches to the receptor which is inside the cell. That causes gene regulation responses, whichever the hormone and the tissue have. Binding of a hormone to receptors initiates a signal transduction pathway leading to response in the cytoplasm, enzyme activation, and change in gene expression. This picture is showing the different basically hormones which are attaching to different target cells. Basically they are attached into the cell surface and causes a cascade of events that causes gene expression and different kinds of responses inside the cell depending on the hormone the target cells. Like insulin, for example, it comes from the pancreas, endocrine part of the pancreas, poured into the blood, reaches to each and every cell of the body which are insulin dependent, like muscle cells, kidney cells, heart cells, smooth muscle cells. Then attach it to the receptors, open the gate for the glucose entry into the cell, and after attaching to the receptors on the cell surface, insulin opens the gate, glucose goes inside the cell. The hormone epinephrine has multiple effects in mediating the body response to short-term stresses. Epinephrine binds to receptors on the plasma membrane of the liver cells. This triggers the release of messenger molecules that activate enzymes that result in release of glucose into the bloodstream. Epinephrine, you guys know that they are epinephrine and norepinephrine are the hormones of fright, flight, and fright mechanism. They are the neurotransmitters of the uh, sympathetic and parasympathetic system. They basically increase the blood glucose by causing the effect like glucagon, by increasing the breakdown of the glycogen, by releasing glucose into the blood, so that the glucose availability is there, and the person can have their fight, and fright mechanism going on. Epinephrine attaches to receptors, activates G protein. G proteins basically activates adenyl cyclase, take care, and activated cyclic AMP, which causes the activation of protein kinase A. Protein kinase A, what it does is inhibition of glycogen synthesis and causes promotion of glycogen breakdown. It basically stops the formation of glycogen and it breaks down the glycogen, so the blood glucose levels becomes high. Response to a lipid soluble hormone is usually a change in the gene expression. Steroid hormone, thyroid hormones, and the hormones of vitamin D enter target cells, bind to protein receptors in cytoplasm or nucleus. Protein receptor complex then act as transcription factors in nucleus, regulating transcription of specific genes. So basically they have the receptors inside the cell. They're bound with the proteins so that they can be carried in the blood, because they are basically steroid hormones are insoluble, hydrophobic in nature, so have to be bound to proteins to travel freely through blood and enters the cell and causes gene expression, transcription, and causing specific effects to the tissues and cells. Like estrogen hormone enters the cell, attaches to receptors and forming hormone receptor complex and causing nucleus to form messenger RNA, and messenger RNA for vitellogen, and vitellogen is formed. The same hormone may have different effects on target cells. They have different receptors for hormones, different signal transduction pathways. Like same receptor but different intercellular proteins, different cellular responses. Epinephrine have effect on beta receptors and alpha receptors. On beta receptors, glycogen deposits, glycogen breakdowns, and glucose released from the cells. Epinephrine on beta receptors causes vasodilation. Epinephrine on alpha receptors causes vasoconstriction. So on different cells receptors, they have different responses. On beta receptors, they may be basically causing glycogen breakdown. On alpha receptor, causing vasoconstriction. Or beta receptors of the vasculature causing vasodilation. This is skeletal muscle blood vessels dilation, intestinal blood vessels constriction. So they have the different effect on different receptors. It's the same hormone or neurotransmitter which have the different effect on different receptors. As you can see, beta receptors on liver causing glycogen breakdown, beta receptors on vessels of the blood skeletal muscles causing vasodilation, and alpha receptors of the intestinal blood vessels causing vasoconstriction. Local regulators are secreted molecules that link neighboring cells or directly regulate the secretory cells, like cytokines, growth factors, nitric oxide, and prostaglandins. In the immune system, prostaglandins promote fever and inflammation and intensify the sensation of pain. So these symptoms and signs, fever, inflammation, pain, these are caused by prostaglandins. Prostaglandins help regulate aggregation of platelets, an early step in the formation of blood clots. These are the local hormones. They have their short life and they act on the adjacent cells or the same cells. Now we have a coordination between neuroendocrine and endocrine signal systems. The endocrine and nervous system act coordinately to control reproduction and development, as discussed earlier. Then hormones are assembled in regulatory pathways. They basically have their antagonist hormones in pairs, and they also give their feedback, so the hormones should be released or should be stopped. Hormones are released from an endocrine cells, travel through bloodstream, interact with specific receptor with the target cell to cause a physiological response, as you know. For example, release of acid content of the stomach into duodenum stimulates endocrine cells to secrete secretin. Secretin causes the pancreas to basically secrete bicarbonate through pancreatic duct into the duodenum. So the pH should be the pH of the acidic content of the stomach should be maintained and brought back to the normal 7 pH. This is a pathway swing stimulus, endocrine secretions, blood vessels, target cells and response. After the response has been done, it can give the negative feedback to stop the stimulus. Take care if it has abundant quantity of, for example, we have low pH in the duodenum. Secretin cells of the duodenum secrete hormone secretin. It acts on the endocrine secretion basically of the bicarbonate from the pancreas. And the bicarbonate is released and acted upon the chyme or the food which is basically comes from stomach into the duodenum, which is high pH. When it's basically regulated, then there is a response that it should go the stimulus should stop the secretion of secretin so that the bicarbonate should be not be released. More bicarbonate is not needed by the in the duodenum to balance that. In a simple neuroendocrine pathway, the stimulus received by a sensory neuron which stimulates the neurosecretory cells. Neurosecretory cells secretes a neurohormone which enter the bloodstream and travel to the target cells. This is a positive feedback stimulus, suckling, sensory neurons, hypothalamus and pituitary. Neurosecretory cells secretes a neurohormone known as oxytocin. It is secreted in the blood vessels and it acts on the target cells which are breast and basically causes milk release. So suckling of the baby basically gives a response and causing the neuroendocrine system to regulate and causes the breast to release milk, and when this is basically known as the positive feedback. A negative feedback loop inhibits a response by reducing the initial stimulus, thus preventing excessive pathway activity. If you have the hormone and the target cells and it is basically cause its effect, then you have to stop that, and again this levels of these hormones causes the stimulus to stop, not to secrete more hormone by the endocrine gland, and this is caused the negative feedback. Positive feedback is basically response to stimulus produced by a greater response, as I have causing you the suckling effect causes oxytocin to be released from the posterior pituitary and effect on the breast, so the milk is ejected. This basically happens in both animals as well as in humans. The hypothalamus and pituitary are central to endocrine regulation. Endocrine pathways subject to regulation by nervous system including the brain. The hypothalamus receives information the nervous system and initiates response to the endocrine system. So we have hypothalamic pituitary regulation. Attached to the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland composed of anterior and posterior pituitary gland. We have two parts, anterior and posterior of the pituitary gland, which is regulated by the secretions from the hypothalamus. And basically the posterior pituitary just store and secretes the hormone that are made in the hypothalamus. So basically the posterior pituitary does not produce any hormone. It basically just stores the two hormones, the ADH, also known as vasopressin, antidiuretic hormone, and the oxytocin, which are basically formed in the hypothalamus and stored in the posterior pituitary and released when they are needed. While in the anterior pituitary makes and release the hormones that are under the regulation of hypothalamus. For example, we have thyroid releasing hormones, TRH, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. TSH is produced in anterior pituitary, released from the anterior pituitary, act on the thyroid gland and causes the release of the thyroxine T3 and T4, trihydrothyrannine and tetrahydrothyrannine, which are basically the thyroid hormones. But this TSH from the anterior pituitary is basically regulated by TRH, thyrotropic releasing hormone, which is secreted by the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus secretes TRH, which acts on anterior pituitary to release TSH. TSH goes to the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland basically secretes the Thyroid gland hormones. So this is a picture showing hypothalamus, anterior and posterior pituitary, located in the lower part of the brain. These are basic. The hypothalamus release from posterior pituitary hormones regulate the posterior pituitary, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. They are peptide in nature. Oxytocin stimulates contraction of uterus and mammary glands. Antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin, is also a peptide hormone. Promotes retention of water by kidneys. Water and salt balance. In anterior pituitary, we have growth hormone, prolactin, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adenocorticotropic hormone. These are the hormones which basically are produced in the anterior pituitary gland. Growth hormone and prolactin are protein in nature. FSH, LH, and TSH are glycoprotein in nature, as adenocorticotropic hormone is peptide in nature. Growth hormone stimulates growth, specifically in bones, metabolic function. Prolactin stimulates milk production and secretion. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates production of ovums and sperms, ovum in females and sperms in males. Luteinizing hormone stimulates ovaries and testes to produce their hormones like progesterone, estrogen from ovaries in females, and testosterone from testes in males. Thyroid stimulating hormone acts on thyroid gland, stimulate thyroid gland secretions T3 and T4. Adenocorticotropic hormones ACTH stimulates adrenal cortex to secretes glucocorticoids. Okay. Then thyroid gland basically secretes, when acted upon by TSH, secretes T3 and T4 and calcitonin. T3 and T4 stimulates and maintains metabolic processes, and calcitonin lowers the blood calcium level. While the parathyroid hormone or parathormone is peptide in nature, secreted by the parathyroid gland, present 4 button-shaped gland present behind the thyroid gland, raises blood calcium. They are antagonists to each other. Parathyroid and calcitonin are antagonists to each other. Adrenal glands, we have adrenal cortex, which secretes glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. They are steroid in nature, made from cholesterol. Glucocorticoids raise blood glucose levels, and mineralocorticoids promote reabsorption of sodium and excretion of potassium. Glucocorticoids are cortisol, mineralocorticoids are aldosterone. Then we have adrenal medulla. They are amines in nature. They are regulated by parasympathetic sympathetic system, and raise blood glucose levels, increase metabolic activities, constricts blood vessels. They are under the nervous system. We have pancreas, which secrete insulin, endocrine part. They are protein in nature. Insulin lowers the blood glucose level, and glucagon raises the blood glucose levels. In gonads, we have testes, which basically supports sperm formation, promotes development and maintenance of male secondary sexual characteristics, and also secretes testosterone. Ovaries secretes estrogen and progesterone. They are also steroid in nature, stimulates uterine lining growth, promote development and maintenance of female secondary sexual characteristics. Progesterone promotes uterine lining growth, help in pregnancy, maintenance of pregnancy. Pineal gland basically secretes melatonin, involved in biological light and dark rhythms. So these are the hormones, introduction to hormones. Then inshallah in the next lectures we'll discuss each and every hormone and how the hypothalamus and pituitary gland is basically linked together, how they work, and how these hormones affect different target cells, different tissues in the body, the changes they bring basically to different areas, different tissues of the body. So these are some of the endocrine secretions which we have discussed in short brief, but we'll discuss in later on in the long term discussions. So we have different types of hormones: autocrine, paracrine, endocrine, and exocrine. Take care. Then we have neuroendocrine secretion and synaptic signals. Thank you very much.